Welcome, everyone. Today, we welcome back Gary Wayne. Gary is an incredible researcher and author, and he is the author of the Genesis 6 Conspiracy and now also part two. So, for me, it's always a real challenge deciding on what area to focus on for interviews with Gary because there's just such a huge repertoire of his work. And I just felt in prayer that I was being guided. It would be such a great opportunity to continue on with what we first discussed, which was about the fairy and the dragon Nephilim bloodline. So if you haven't seen that interview, that is on my YouTube back a few months. And today we're going to discuss the Druids, the dragons, and how these really connect into the Templars, the Rosicrucians, and the Jesuits and their huge role in end time. So I think it will be a very eye-opening interview, and I really hope that it just assists survivors connecting some dots as well. For me, Gary's books just really unpack the roots of the Nephilim bloodlines, the royal blue blood ruling class that so many of us as survivors of SRA and mind control have either been born into, brought into, or just used by in experiments and projects. And I really love Gary's incredible research because it's one of the few avenues of information really being shared at this time that is not being done under a new age belief system. And Gary keeps the Bible as his foundation, his measure of truth. And I think it's just so refreshing to be able to go through these topics and have them framed by the Bible and brought back to God as well. So reading Gary's books for me personally really supported me in breaking through a lot of programming, as well as just defining the influences that my bloodline was working with. And that can be really difficult for survivors, just working out like what groups your family, the cult that you were born into, or were programmed within, were actually using. And Gary's books and just working out where my family was fitting into the different bloodlines and Nephilim groups really allowed me to target my prayer, target my deliverance work, and really, get strong in breaking off that spiritual bondage. So I just pray today that as Gary shares with us, he's able to connect many more dots for survivors listening to bring us breakthrough, healing, and just let's continue to shake the enemy's kingdom. So welcome, Gary. We're so thankful to have you with us, sharing your 40-year journey of studying the Bible. And now your two books, book two's out as well, which I've just been going through again the second time, and I feel like there's even more that I've gotten out of it this time through. So welcome. How are you?
Doing very well and happy to be back on your show and looking forward to the discussion. And yeah, I like a lot of the ways you framed the introduction there. And so it's difficult penetrating through the hierarchical organizational structure of the world to get any sort of common sense out there, so to speak, in terms of trying to understand how this world works. And the reason why I think we're starting to get some more traction is because more and more people are realizing that something's not right in the world. And who are these leaders who just keep screwing things up out there? And how did they come to power? How did the world come to be? And where the heck is it going? And you don't have to be Christian to be asking those questions. And so I think it's been heartening to see some of the things that I write about and what I talk about. Actually, I hear a lot coming back at me now on terms that I kind of coined, so to speak, and people are using that because it frames kind of some visuality for people in terms of understanding that there's not just a visible uh, organizational structure that we deal with, but it's backed by an invisible hierarchy. And what's interesting is with the polytheists and their belief system, and particularly with the Western Gnostics, they believe 2025 is this time when that external hierarchy is going to be made visible. So the invisible ones are going to become visible as we enter into this age of Lord Maitreya, as they like to call it, and that sort of connects back into more some of the Eastern belief systems. But and we had the Vatican opening up the gates on some sort of crazy jubilee, 25 years into the century, which is not a Christian or Judaic jubilee. But the first 25 years of a century is the most important of the jubilees in polytheism, and he's opening up some gates, at the end of the year. And you're kind of wondering, what the heck is that all about? So we seem to be entering into a new period. I'm not saying we're in the last 7 years by any stretch of the imagination. There's lots to happen yet, but now we can start to frame how that different sort of disparate things that we talk about through history and prehistory and what's going on today and what will happen in the end time, how they start to intersect. And I think the more we can do that to make clear that this is a long-term agenda and that the players haven't changed, just the generations have. So it's a transgenerational experience that we're talking about that has a timetable on it. And I think we might be in that fig tree generation right now.
Wow. Just feels like 2025 has been set up to be such a big year. Do you know what I mean? Like in so many different
Yeah,
religions by the United Nations. I think even the Essenes, it might be their more modern chapters in America, have like been talking about 2025. So it's just, I feel like
they have.
it's calm
They
before the
have.
storm, right? It's like, okay, what's going to go down this year or what's
Yeah.
not going to go down this year?
Now, yeah, and we should always be aware that the polytheists always have an agenda to bring about the end time before it's ordained time. But until the restrainer is removed, then they're going to be continually rebuffed and pushed back. So, but that doesn't mean they don't continue to try and double down. And that's what we're trying to see. They're trying to force it in, but there's still a lot of events that have to come together. But as you move into catastrophes, that creates an opportunity for things to happen quickly.
Wow. Well, you mentioned the invisible ones, and I think let's start unpacking that because I think that's such a big area for survivors. And like the main topic that I reached out to Gary to cover that's coming up for so many survivors in prayer and breaking through their programming at the moment is really the Druid connections. And there's actually a real lack of solid info out there. And I think that's very deliberate. They're being kept very hidden and they've kind of been made out to be the good guys. So, like we've got things like Wicca and all the nature
Yep.
worship, the queen with her oak trees and stuff like that. So it seems kind of like more harmless. When this is really some of the strongest black magic out there. It's really
Yeah.
dark. And there's
Yeah.
Druidry, and I know in your books, Gary, you've went through the Tuatha De Denann bloodlines as well. So I would love you to just, yeah, highlight, I guess, what the connections are there as well.
Yeah, so let's maybe just start with the Druids. And we kind of look at them as we've been brainwashed to do, is to look at them, well, that was the religion of the Celts. And it kind of just stops there, right? And we don't even sort of take a pause to say that Wicca is basically witchcraft. And you got that word craft, right? And craft is what the secret societies are all about. So typically, as an adept, it's not unusual to be a witch in Druidism or a warlock
Yep.
in Druidism, and being part of Freemasonry or Illuminati or Rosicrucians or however how you want to go up in the hierarchy. So they use the same terms. So we should understand, a priest of the Druids is basically a warlock, and the priestess is a witch. That's their understanding, and that they have the typical, good versus evil within the religion, and also as they externalize that outside of it to the battle with the God of everything for at least a little while longer. They'll continue that way, but they have black magic and they have white magic. That's their classic dualism. They have good kings and evil kings. They have good Nephilim and bad Nephilim. You have, as Elon Musk is trying to do, create good AI to offset the evil AI of Google. It's those are the terms that they talk in, and it's been with us that way forever. And the Druids are a very ancient religion and are the religion of the Tuatha De Denann as they were migrating. And if we understand that the Tuatha De Denann is the post-Diluvian giants, however they get here, however you decide they get there, they're part of the five groups of the Indo-Aryans, and that they have their gods and their language and their religion that is um, directly connected back to the religion of the giants. And we might know that as Zoroastrianism in Persia, which are dark-haired Indo-Aryans. Um, and it is the same religion as what was taken into the Indus Valley, which is why you have gods crossing over in post-Diluvian period, and where we have the records where you have gods of like Indra that are used in treaties right through the Middle East with the Mitanni dynasty, with the Hittites, and all of those different types of people. So when we look at who the Tuatha De Danann are, they are part of a larger group of giants, and they had their own language that moves into the English language and other languages because it sort of intersects with the migration from Babel 100 years after the flood, where people are going to be moving in with the Aboriginals, which are the Indo-Aryans, which are the giants. So we should understand that there's a proto-religion and a proto-language that starts to mix in with that sort of migration. So if we look at how the Druids are considered within the larger hierarchy of, uh, let's call them infamous organizations in the occult, they are considered right there with the Brahmin. They're considered right there with the mages and the magi of Sumeria and Mesopotamia. They are there with the Greek philosophers. They are there with the Egyptian priests. They are equal. They are the same religion, just has different vernacular names. And so you have a very much a similar type of pantheon and religion that is in Ireland and Scotland and England as what you have in Norway and Sweden and Denmark and in Germany and other places because they're the same root tribes of the migrating Tuatha De Danann as they show up after the flood. So what do I mean by just a couple of quick sort of connections there so people don't think I'm making it up as I go? Um, you have there's this and most of the pantheons have this bizarre god that nobody really accounts for, right? Except that he's just there and we don't know why, um, unless you really start to dig deep. So you have Cernunnos in the Druidic pantheon, which is a horned nature god, sort of simply, but he's actually a goat god, right? And I'll come back to that. It's the same god that is in the Norse pantheon as Odin as the horn god.
Um,
And it's the same god as um, the god Bacchus in the Roman pantheon.
um,
And in the Etruscan, which are the proto Latins, these are the Indo-Aryans. The name of the horn god wasn't Bacchus, it was Cern, C-E-R-N. And
uh,
it means
we
in
know that now.
Indo-Aryan, it means in Indo-Aryan, a horned-headed god. And it's very close to the top of the pantheon in each of these. It's the same as the pan god. It's a satyr or satyr god biblically, and Azazel is depicted as a goat god, and a goat god, just as Baphomet is depicted as a name for Azazel, and Baphomet means father Mithra. Mithra is a Indo-Aryan word for uh, meaning a bond or an alliance, which is important to remember in their allegories and their names. And so when we look at Mitra in Sanskrit or Mithra in Persian, one is Mitra, one, and the Persian is with an H in there, Mithra. These are very important and kind of unaccounted for gods in those religions as well, right? And so who is Mithra? Well, Mithra is the chief god of the Zoroastrians, the great architect of the universe, as he's also described, and the same religion that's Mithraism, that is a branch of Zoroastrianism, which was part of the Roman religion that gets a lot of their allegories and gods and dates into Christianity because Mithra's birth date is December 25, not Jesus's birth date. But that's, I don't want to get down that rabbit hole. I just want to sort of, because
And would you
we can
say,
go open up a
Gary,
lot of doors.
would
Yeah.
you say with the great architect that Mithra is also an influence of
Yeah.
like Freemasonry, with their great
Yes.
architect?
Yes. Well, because Baphomet is the chief god providing the knowledge for the Templars, who
Mm,
after their dispersion are going to create the modern secret societies to be decentralized, whom Freemasonry is one of the first organizations that's being created um, after the Rosicrucians, so to speak, because they have a more of a hidden history in terms of their start. So yes,
yeah.
that's just telling you that they're all sort of interconnected. So this Mithra is the same word that is woven into Lord Maitreya that we talked about. And Lord Maitreya and Mithra are gods that are destroyer gods that come at the end of an age, like Shiva or Abaddon or Apollyon or Azazel, and that out of that destruction they renew the world afterwards.
Mm,
And so now we have Lord Maitreya, which is an allegory for the Antichrist, who would probably, by that implication, be an avatara of the avatar Maitreya the god.
yeah.
And we would understand that as receiving the power from Satan, just as Satan entered into Judas biblically. And we know that in 2 Thessalonians 2, that Antichrist, the son of perdition, will receive all of his power from Satan. He probably enters in him to do that.
Yeah.
Now, that could be Azazel as well, or both. I mean, we're talking about polytheist doctrine in the biggest form of its expression that they're ever going to do before the end comes. And so they're going to provide them as much power from inside as possible. And so I think when we look at Revelation, 12 and 13, I mean, he receives his power from the red dragon, which is another allegory not only for the beast empire, but for Satan. So we get a lot of things that are implying that there's a dragon and or a red dragon. It could be both. So it could be two. And of course, Azazel, I think, is the leader of the Watchers, who is the destroyer of the antediluvian world, depicted as a goat god in polytheism. And that word Azazel shows up in the Bible as the second goat, the scapegoat in the King James Version Bible. That goes back to the Hebrew word Azazel, that is sacrificed without reason in terms of the context of why it's happening. So we know the first goat is sacrificed for the sins of Israel. But we're not told who the second goat is, and it's called the scapegoat, which is Azazel.
Yeah.
And that's because he's the destroyer of the antediluvian world, and nothing is new under the sun. What was will be again, and the understanding of this only brings grief and sorrow, according to the book of Ecclesiastics. And guess who gets released in the end time? Abaddon Apollyon, which is the destroyer of the world. So it's likely
Similar
you
opponent.
see, and that's why sometimes they say, well, do you think it's going to be Azazel that gives the power to Antichrist? Well, possibly, because we're also told Antichrist is the one who comes up out of the abyss and Satan isn't in the abyss. But yet we're also told he receives power from Satan in 2 Thessalonians 2. So I tend to lean more for both.
Yeah. Yeah. And that seems to be
And
common that they use
yeah,
multiple principalities for power
yeah.
rather than just one. So, yeah.
And the chief god of within Hinduism and the old religion of the giants Vishnu incarnated like over 20 times into people like Buddha to give him the wisdom to create that religion. And Shiva, the destroyer god, also, I think, was an avatar for an avatara at least a dozen times. So these are not unknown concepts. And we get examples of that effect in the Bible with Satan and with uh, Judas, who is the first son of perdition.
It's quite incredible. Like I know when I've been exploring Druidry, I was really surprised just to find that it was linked to, the ancient Eastern religions so much.
Yeah,
Like you see the same images and like for example, like the tree, like Buddha sits under the tree to become enlightened, right? And then we have
yeah,
Queen with her Druidry and her love of oak trees, planting oak trees all around the world.
yeah,
Then the Gnostics have their tree of knowledge. And even in survivor programming, like we've got the kabbala tree, which is what they
yep.
they literally install that and then hang so much off of it with the programming. So there's this really, and I guess it comes back to the nature worship, but I would love to ask you your thoughts on this, Gary, as well, as like this tree imagery has really went around the world, like through
It
Druidry,
is.
Nephilim bloodlines, as
It is.
as
Yep.
a point of worship. So yeah, I would love to dig into
Yep.
that a bit with you.
And from its sort of universal application is, as you talk about, an oak tree with the Druids, or an ash tree, or an elm tree, all associated with Mount Hermon as well. Just they're trees of that forest, along with the cedar trees. Um, the larger understanding of this tree is called the world tree that I talked about in book one, that connects heaven and earth, and its roots go into the earth. And that's very important imagery because the gods in polytheism are in their heaven, but it's not above, it's below. It's in Hades and Sheol, Agartha, the other world. And when the thousands of different names around the world is where their gods roam. And that's where the bloodlines and the giants, after their bodies died, they wanted to find a way to get there to be with their gods. It's also the location of the pit prison as well, but so it's got to be a big place occupying the same place as the earth, but and it's different than the lake of fire. But we should sort of look at um, these connections that are throughout the world in that religion when we look at Asherah trees, for example, and the groves in the Bible. And again, because these are trees that are also in the Mount Hermon region. And I don't want to people who are experts on trees and hardwoods don't kill me over this one, but there's a connection between people conflating the idea of an oak tree, an elm tree, and an ash tree. And I know there's even different kinds of oaks, so I'm a hardwood guy. So, but in the occult understanding, they're the same tree allegorically. And so this is that image of the world tree. So they're like umbrella trees, right? Now, oak would be a little bit different because it tends to grow straight up and reach for the sky, but it will branch out once it starts to dominate. Um, and so, but the roots go back into Hades and Sheol because that's where the celestial mafia godfathers are.
Wow.
And they're the ones who produce the bloodlines and the giants as the patriarchs of the original giant families. And so when we get this phylogenetic tree, and notice the word gene in there, it's the same thing as what we would call the genealogical tree. And so each of the lines has a gens. And we know some of the more famous ones, but we don't know all of them. But you have like the Cretagens, which is the bloodline from Zeus and Alcmene that produced Hercules and the Herculides Gyges kings. You have the Elbigens of the more Northern European um, bloodlines. You have the Julia gens of the original black nobility and the 100 senator families that produced Caesar and Augustus as part of an extension downstream of that, but going back upstream, that goes back to Romulus and Remus, that of the bloodlines that produced the 100 senator families, who's the offspring of Mars and Ares. So these are important sort of genes. So when they're talking about a genealogical tree, they're talking about their bloodlines, and they use that to track their genealogies, right? And so that tree is first seen in a visible way, in a public way, in about 1360. And it's by Hugh the Fourth Lusignan, one of the kings of Jerusalem,
Mm.
who's the kingdom of heaven, and the kingdom of Jerusalem title is part of the Anjou title for the end time Antichrist that they say they have, and they want to be that family of bloodline who's King Philippe of Spain, Bourbon, son of Juan Carlos. They inherited that King of Jerusalem title and holds that to this day. Not saying he's the Antichrist, because there's many wannabes that are out there, but we need to understand this sort of concept, right? And so what's interesting about the elm tree, which is in Gnosticism is the most holiest of the trees versus the oak and the Tuatha De Denann, that's the Hebrew word Elah, Elah. Well, El is the word for a god,
Exactly, right.
right? Or an angel. And AH is the female suffix. So you could do that with the application of the power of God there, or you could apply that as a meaning for a female goddess.
Yes.
And then you start to see the connections of Asherah and Ashtart and those other words that come out of that Middle East area, which would have similar types of languages in the beginning. And you start to see there's a mother goddess aspect that's working back here, just as Diana or Danu would be the female goddess of the Tuatha De Danann, and in the Roman pantheon, it's Diana. And you start to see these interconnections again, and that this is the religion of the Tuatha De Danann giants of the Druids who called themselves serpents.
Yes.
And typically, we get most of the serpentine imagery from the Seraphim gods who produced the Tuatha De Danann, and most of the governing bloodlines of the giants. And they had a serpent face and 6 wings. So they're the dragon creator gods. They're the plumed and feathered serpent gods. They're the Naga gods. They're all of these serpentine gods all around the world, just as throughout the Middle East, they were called Uraeus gods of Canaan and Egypt, flying winged serpent gods like Osiris, for example. So again, we get this sort of commonality, and they produced offspring initially before the flood that looked just like them. And then if they produced giants after the flood, they would have had that look. But because of the intermarriage issue that they had to do, otherwise they would go extinct, they lost a lot of the size and those initial looks. So this imagery of serpents and wisdom is all interconnected, and it's all part of the Druidic system, just as the seraphim angels, which Azazel was and the Watchers were, provided all of the ancient knowledge to the antediluvians, and why, again, Azazel is depicted upside down in Rosalind Chapel with this rope that forms an S or a Z, and he's got this necklace of pearls, which is the pearls of wisdom, an allegory for that ancient knowledge. I mean, it just goes in 1,000 different directions. I just want to show some of the
Yeah.
imagery and the connections as how they go through so many different cultures.
Wow. That is huge, Gary. So really the Tuatha De Danann are the Seraphim bloodline. And that's kind of what's come through
Yeah,
into all the
blonde-haired,
books, like the
red-haired, blue eyes, hazel eyes, very pale skin, versus
wow.
the dark-haired giants like the Persians or the ones that settled in the Indus Valley. And the Syrian kings are depicted like that as well. That's probably from a different watcher.
So interesting. And I know, like, as I've been kind of tracing the Tuatha De Denann and the Druids through, like they were starting to connect into like the Templars, the Jesuits, and then I was surprised, like into the Rosicrucians as well. And I know in your book you wrote about there was actually like a ceremony or a ritual which was like the cutting of the elm, right? Would you be able to explain? Because that seems to be quite important, like
Yeah.
it's where they drew the line, like this is us, this is you, and split
Yeah.
up the brotherhoods.
Yeah. So, and I'll work back into that. I just thought maybe I'd make a couple other connections and it's all interconnected here. So when we look in the ancient Middle East languages, the D and the T were kind of interchangeable. So that if you have the god Aten in Egypt, it would be Adon or Adonis in the Middle East. And it can be spelled similarly or interchangeably with the D and the T, depending on which culture that you're in. So when we look at the Ugaritic texts, where the Rephaim are created after the flood by Baal and Anat and the rest of the Baalim council, you have this assembly of the Tanu, which is really the Lord of the Rings after the flood, right? And again, Nippur was at Mount Hermon in the antediluvian age. And so you have this invisible council of the gods at Mount Hermon, Mount Saphon, as it's called in the Ugaritic text, also known as Shinir, also known as Sirion and Sion, biblically, as well as uh, Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon is renamed, is what happens. And the word Hermon is rooted in the Hebrew word karam or haram. I'm sorry, it's not a K, it's a CH, but it's a H sound. And there's a couple different variations of it, but they all mean cursed and accursed or a curse. And this is the home of the oath, the accursed oath that carried out to the end by the 200 watchers, right? So that's why it's renamed for that sort of purpose. So when we look at this council of the gods that are located at Mount Hermon or Mount Sion, that is a French transliteration of Zion that's used that we may want to get into down the road as well. Um, and used in the New Testament Bible instead of Zion in the KJV, because they're two different Hebrew words for Sion for Mount Hermon and Zion for Israel and Jerusalem and the mount in Jerusalem. So as we look at that assembly of the gods, that's the invisible ones, and the original assembly after the flood is the assembly of the Tanu. So the Tanu is akin to, as you go into other cultures, as the tribe of Danu, the Tuatha Danu, D apostrophe Anu, as opposed to Tuatha De Denann, as we might understand that. That's why you see Tuatha De Denann also used as a closer sort of connection to Danu, as people would want to make that connection. I do that a couple of times, and people said, "You got it wrong." I said, "No, here's where it's used," and just understand what they're doing with it. I'm just telling you, there's a whole bunch of different names for the Tuatha De Denann. And so, I mean, they're known as the Shea people as well, or the Sede, or the thousand different ways you can pronounce that, as one other example. But this is understood as the Tuatha De Anu. Anu is the parent god of the Sumerian pantheon. Yeah, so that gets really interesting. And then when you look at the Tanu, um, you've got that as being the assembly of the Tuatha De Danann as you sort of follow that transliteration. And the Tanu are the transliterated Titanu or Titan out of the Greek mythology with that D and T interchanging of it.
Mm.
So you have to watch that in the words and the languages, and it will help you because you can also have Dadan as it shows up in Hebrew as being the same word and the same unexplained people in the Old Testament in the area of the covenant land or Tadua is another variation of that. And you might see Dadua as well, which is all, as you take those back in those research, are Tuatha De Denann. So this is a very large group of people with different, as I said, there's 4 to 5 different groups of these Indo-Aryans after the flood. So when we look at this tribe of the Detanu that's in the Ugaritic text that are Rephaim giants that were created by the Baalim, now we can start to look at that elm tree as it's described in the New Testament with the Asherah groves and the importance of the elm tree, just as we said, that was Hebrew for Elah and the mother goddess, right?
Yeah. Here comes the goddess. Yeah.
Yes, right. So the cutting of the elm is a very important um, event in secret society and bloodline history. So you have an organization that is going to be created called the Priory of Sion, that is even more ancient than its creation at the time of the First Crusade. So you have a senior order at this time, and they're all royals. So Godfrey de Bouillon is an Anjou of the Lorraine region. Hugh de Péan is an Anjou of the Lorraine region in France, just as the folk of Anjou is from the same area, and they're all tightly related. So you're going to have the Knights Templar that are formed starting in about 1090 with Calabrian monks and Godfrey de Bouillon and forming the sort of uh, polytheist mix that's going to go in that because these are Gnostics, the Calabrian monks. So, and you're going to have Essenic groups that are involved here, Sabian groups, and a whole host of polytheist groups, including the Gnostics. And so they decide that once they take Jerusalem, they're going to form this order. So in 1099, Godfrey de Bouillon, is crowned the king or the ruler of Jerusalem. And now they're going to form a council of barons that are going to nominate kings, which starts with Godfrey de Bouillon, the hero of the First Crusades. Well, he dies within a year, and then the Baron of Councils nominates his brother Baldwin the First. And then he dies in 1118. You get another Baldwin the Second, which is the folk of Anjou. And so what's going on here is it's the Baron of the Councils and these royals. They are the senior order. They are the Priory of Sion or Sion. And just as with Godfrey de Bouillon and with all the kings that they had until the time of the fall of Jerusalem, they would be initially crowned king in the small priory on the rock of Sion.
Wow.
And people will say, well, that's not historically accurate to say that this group ever existed. So that's why in book 2, I go through all the history of it and give you all the historical sources from the Catholic Encyclopedia and accounting from the Vatican to going right to William of Tyre and pulling that information out and other sources as well. So you've got a lot of data points and they're quite consistent in the accounting of all of this and written down at that time. So don't let people give you that um, propaganda that there was no such organization. It was there, and that's why I put it in the book and I give everybody all of the sources on it.
Yeah,
So,
it's awesome. All the info in the second. I mean, I love both the books, but the second
yeah,
book, I was like, I wasn't sure what to expect, to be honest, Gary, because I was
yeah,
like, the first book went so deep. It goes
yeah,
even deeper and it
yeah.
really, yeah,
And
dives
from a
in.
Christian perspective, in a
Yes.
way that people haven't seen before, which is
Yeah.
why I decided to do the second book because I said I would never write a sequel to it. I didn't want to be redundant. So if I couldn't get new information and
You
that
said,
was meaningful to a large group of people, why do another book on it? So this is the original Priory. And then 6 months later, they would have another ceremony, in this case, in a abbey of the Notre Dame near Bethlehem, where they would do the official ritual that goes back to the assembly of Detanu, where they received their authorization to uh, have the divine right to rule. And this is a uh, ancient right of inheritance for the kingship that goes back to at least there, and I would dare say it's an antediluvian ritual because it was in place before, as we understand the Lord of the Rings and before the flood. So um, as we sort of funnel all of that into our thought process, understand that in 1118 Hugh de Payon takes over as a Grand Master of a new organization called the Templars. Even though most people look at the Templars being created in 1090 or 1099, it's correct. But now we have a split from a senior order into a junior order, which is a very common practice in the occult secret societies. And so in the lower order, people below the Grand Master level aren't adepts, right? Whereas all the royales are way above first level adept because they're initiated from childhood. Um,
Yes.
and and they're very much way higher than a first level third degree old system on the adept system, 33rd degree on the latter Scottish rite, same equivalence, so to speak. And so this is the two orders that come down. So all the kings and all of the grand masters are essentially going to be assigned and appointed by the senior order, which is the Council of Barons that William of Tyre describes them as. So one of their major things that the Templars were designed to do, not only to be this huge force within the church, but they had to protect Jerusalem. Well, they kind of lose their way. They're doing banking, they're doing all sorts of other things, and they're going to lose Jerusalem in 1187. And the cutting of the elm happens in 1188.
Wow.
So that's kind of the reckoning on that. And the Templars, they would administer justice under this huge giant elm tree in the middle of Paris.
Mm.
And the cutting of elm, the cutting of the elm ceremony is going to take place at Geezer Castle, where you also have another legendary elm tree that's going to be cut down in this occult ceremony of this very important tree in the occult belief system. And one of those is a cutting of a genealogical connection because this is part of the meanings of the tree, right? As in a phylogenetic tree, family tree, genealogical tree. So they're going to do this cutting of the elm. This is the place in Geezer Castle where the Grand Monarch, the one that they want to present as Antichrist, will first make his grand entrance into the world at Geezer Castle. And so now you have a splitting of the junior order and the senior order, which is why the Priory of Sion isn't going to run to the Templar protection in 1307 when they're destroyed. And they're going to set up another order, but they're going to again set up kind of a new senior and junior order. And so you're still going to have a Priory of Sion, but you're going to have a Rosy Cross order start to form out of that as we start to see the development, particularly after the splitting up of the Knights Templar. Now, in the cutting of the elm in 1188, that's for losing Jerusalem, right? So that's clearly going to be a split. And the first Grand Master is going to be Jean de Guisers, with whom the castle that this event is taking place on
Oh,
is being done at. And the second Grand Master of the Priory of Sion, as shown going forward from there, is Marie de St. Clair. A St. Clair and a descendant of Henry St. Clair, who was a battle partner with Hugh de Payon in the Crusades, and the transliterated French name for the Sinclairs, who are going to protect the Knights Templar
wow.
fleeing after 1307, and they're going to set up another order called Freemasonry and support that. And then in 1323, that's in 1317, and 1323, Robert the Bruce is going to formally introduce and make the order of the Rosy Cross Order in honor of the protection that they provided and the help at Bannockburn for winning that battle. And so again, you start to see um, this progression, and also understand you're going to have uh, the Rosicrucians go downstream a little bit more, because the original Rosicrucians would be understood better as the invisible 33, the
Wow.
33 invisible ones, or very high adept levels, who are trying in 1317 to reestablish the Templars within the Roman Church, and they fail. And they have to go back underground because they poisoned the Pope. Because they,
That's true.
yeah, because he wasn't going to quite do it the way that they wanted him to do it. So, and again, you start looking at the aligning of some of these dates amongst the royales. I mean, 1317 is the same year that the Montesa order was created in Spain by
Oh,
the King of Spain to take all of the Templar assets. And you have um, a similar order that is going to be set up in Portugal, the Order of Christ, that is going to do the same with the assets in the country of the Port of the Grail, because it's a Templar sponsored nation to become a nation on their own, separate from Spain. So 1317 is a very important date in terms of how they're transitioning and saying, okay, we're going to have to restart, and we're not going to have Templars in the church for a while. So when people will say, well, how can you say that the Priory of Sion is older if they don't have Grand Masters that don't begin before 1188? All the Grand Masters that were Grand Masters of the Knights Templar were those Grand Masters before, as a junior and a senior order, um, but with full control of the senior by the senior order.
wow.
Hopefully, I made some sense out of all of that history.
It's so interesting just seeing how that events, like with the cutting of the elm, just like created so much of like what we see today. Do you know what I mean? It was kind of like
Yeah,
old fell, and then they created the start of all these new brotherhoods as well.
yeah.
Wow.
And the French word for elm is orme. And it's very important to remember that, because it's connected as well to a famous individual, at least in Gnostic lore, named Ormus, who was Sabian, a Sabian or Hermetic Gnostic in Alexandria. And he was allegedly saved by and converted by Saint Mark. But what's important is that name Ormus, as it connects to this organization in there that is um, the Ormuzd cult, and it's Ormuzd, Ormuzd as in the cult. It's the same in the variantly spelled organization that's called Ahura Mazda from the East, right?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah, and
That's
these
the
were,
cult. So they're through Japan and China. Is it like those like
yep,
Asian cults?
yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And they
Wow.
call themselves also the Sages of Light, which again is a cross-cultural term that's used. And these are, one of the main sort of proponents to establishing the Knights Templar Order, and that the Sabians are also part of the mystical aspect of Islam, and understand that the assassins are part of that mystical group of the Sufis, and that they provided their organizational structure to the Knights Templars, who brought that back to Europe. That all of the knight orders, whether it's Knights of St. John or Teutonic Knights, they were all set up under that same organizational structure, as were the junior offshoot secret societies after the Knights Templar.
Wow. So just to kind of gather that together. make it
Yeah.
cool. Because you went into so much detail there, it's fantastic. So the Knights Templar really split them, or the Priory of Sion really split the Knights Templar, and then
Yep.
they became the Rosicrucians as the senior order,
Yep.
kind of managing, like so they look after like the other brotherhoods like Freemasons, Jesuits, etc. Is that kind of
You're getting close
insane?
as you get the
Yeah.
evolution of these sort of groups. So, um, as you look at that invisible 33, and I think there was even before that, because we don't really get an announcement of the 13. The 13 families are at the top. So the 33 is a larger group that we know as the Council of 33 today. And then you have, and as I say, that was sort of the original sort of Rosicrucian order and Rosie Cross order. And so that's larger than the 13. And then you're going to have, as things develop, the Committee of 300 Families. And then the Rosicrucians, even though that name was originally applied, that's pushed down um, to underneath the Committee of 300.
300, yeah. And so
Yeah.
when you talk about these invisible ones, like that's sort of starting to go into I guess people that believe or that have taken on enough entities and principalities during rituals to be what they consider demigods, which was like what
Yeah.
Hitler was working on, and like
Yep.
for survivors like me
Yep.
and other survivors, like we've seen in the higher levels people being able to shapeshift
Yeah.
and change and
Yeah.
do things in rituals and sometimes even just in day-to-day life in abuse scenarios. So like it can sound pretty out there, but this is like
Yep.
what the Nephilim
Yeah. I think at the
all about.
Rosicrucian
So
level, you start to see that sort of nexus point where they'll have that type of ability. So I think you could look at it, and I'm outside looking in, but or trying to look in, is that you may have some representatives of those higher level families within that group. It's an intersection of the purebloods with the adepts rising who are lesser pure, let's put it that way, from Freemasonry and Illuminati and into the Rosicrucian. But with that intermixing of some of the purebloods, that's where they're going to be able to do those phenomenal types of abilities like shapeshifting or almost continual communication, almost at will or by command, with the invisible ones as they go higher. So that's why it's important to understand, the hierarchy for people who aren't all that familiar with it.
yeah.
So if you now look at sort of like the Jesuits, well, like where do they fit in, right? And the Jesuits are a unique organization. And so they are the new Templar dream to be reinserted into the Roman Church to try and replace them. So in 1317, there's this order called the Mithra order that we referenced, that held all of the Templar assets. And this is a royal Masonic order. So it's an order of the king. And so when Ignatius of Loyola comes along in about 1525, and in the time of the Inquisition, and he's out there preaching, he's preaching against the church. And he's also had several Mary apparition initiations at this sort of point, an indoctrination, which is a common thing in the secret societies. Mary and the Mother Goddess, the Queen of Heaven, as they are more the mother goddess than Mary, son of, or Mary, the
Exactly.
mother of Jesus, right? As a lot of people think that they're talking about. So he gets into trouble with the Inquisition. And he's being initiated to become a soldier. He's been initiated to overturn the Roman Church from within as part of his initiation agenda. So a fellow by the name of Francis Borgia, if that name sounds familiar, he comes from a line of popes. And so obviously Spanish and Italian connections on the two ends of the family. And he notices him, and he's also in the court of the King of Spain at that time. Like he's a noble Basque, Like this is a very, very important individual.
And Loyola was Basque as well, right? Like that
Yeah,
have had that interesting background as well to the
yeah. So he bails Francis. I'm not Francis of Magnolia, but Francis Borgia. He bails Ignatius out of prison, and then he starts to sponsor him using his royal and Vatican connections and sponsors them into an order by about 1534, 1535, and several bulls that are going to give them control of um, education and seminary schools within the church and the Roman Church and much more. But what's interesting with Francis Borgia is in the 1550s, he resigns as the leader and the Grand Master of the Montesa Order, which has the Templar assets. It is a Templar order that replaced them, just as the Order of Christ is a Templar of Order, because the KTs are, they're essentially banned. So he's going to have a son take over. He's going to be the last Grand Master before the king folds all of that back into the Order of the Golden Fleece and the assets that go with it. Um, so where I'm going with this is Francis Borgia joins the Jesuits. By 1565, he becomes the third leader of the Jesuits. By working with the King of Spain, who is having political battles and wars with the Vatican, they bankrupt the Vatican. The what you would call the Holy Roman Emperor um, will take control of the Vatican, take the banking away from the junior black nobility of the Medicis and that whole junior aspect, which aren't the senior black nobility of the Romulus and Remus bloodlines. They're bloodlines from other countries who have moved, like from Palestine. So the Medicis would be a sort of a classic case of that. I think they came from Tyre. So as I recall, so they are going to um, uh, with the Jesuits, they get control of the banking in reward for that. So now you have a Grand Master from a Knights Templar order back in control of the banking. And then they're going to move it to Switzerland
yeah, which
with
we know.
control of that banking.
Yeah.
Now, why would they go to Switzerland? Because in 1307, with the fall of the Knights Templar, some of the treasures in France went to um, Scotland on the escape, but most of the wealth went to Switzerland. So why Switzerland? Because the Knights of St. John, same kind of order as the Knights Templar, were already established there over 100 years before, and the Knights Templar will take their wealth and give it to a sister organization who has a cross that is not red but white. And that's the start of banking in Switzerland. So this is just a reunification of banking when the Vatican banking gets moved there. And people will note that the White Cross is the flag of Switzerland. It's, I mean, because it has that roots, they're going to get their independence. And today, even the Rothschilds, which were created by the secret societies and the royals to be banking outside the Vatican Church, has moved all of their banking to Switzerland, where they keep all of their off the books wealth. And it was created for that. So, and what the Jesuits are there is to complete what the Jesuits were created for with inside the Roman Church is the same agenda as the Knights Templar, to create the new Babylon from within the church.
Yeah.
So again, I mean, just the
It's
interconnection and political playing
yeah,
throughout the religions tells you they've had control of the religions,
a lot.
monotheist for the most part, and polytheist all throughout our history.
Exactly. And I think people, like, just going off what you're saying about the religions, people don't realize that the Jesuits and the Freemasons under them very much have control of like the entire New Age. Like in Australia, they control all of Wicca, for example. And
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
so people run from organized religion. Like they're like, I've, had a bad experience with the Catholic Church, which is fair
Yeah.
enough. And they run
Yeah.
straight into this, alternative, which is being run by the same people. It's just a different flavor of ice cream, right?
It,
Um,
it is. It
no,
is. So, um, but at least you're getting taught the Bible within
yes,
Masonic
some of
controlled
it.
churches. Yeah,
Some
some
of
of it. They
it.
may be twisting the meaning and not telling you everything, but yeah, but
Totally.
they're there to, keep people more in the dark than they are in the light. So,
Yeah. And so just to kind of put that in a nutshell, like it sounds like from what you're saying and like from what you've went through with the books, like the Rosicrucians are potentially a higher, more Nephilim bonded group of
yes,
people than
yes.
someone so like potentially some of the Jesuits which are reporting to them. I think you mentioned in your book as well.
Yeah.
And we see
Well,
the
because
Rosicrucians. Sorry, what were you going to say?
Well, when you look at the Jesuits, I mean, they are part of the black nobility, and the black pope lineage, but the resurgence of the Jesuits, because they were disbanded in the 1800s and then reset up again in the late 1800s with the Mary apparitions coming about and the Pope being imprisoned in France and all those sort of dynamics and the politics and the rivalries. They were put back in place by the junior black nobility
They're not the higher.
versus the senior one. Yeah. So where do they fit in? They kind of fit into, depending on where you want to put, is it the junior or the senior that's controlling them today? If they're the junior, they'd be more in with the 300 families versus originally they would have been probably the Council of 33 is where they would have fit in as a branch organization.
Wow. Yeah, makes sense. And the Rosicrucians, seem to be very prominent at the moment with like false platforms, controlled disclosure, which they've been involved in for a very long time, like, with their
Yeah.
Gnostic roots. So, there's things like, I mean, they were originally set up to bring out the arts, the
Yeah.
science, maths. Do you
Yeah.
know what I mean? So there's all these things in our society that we think are true, or they're things that we've grown up with, and we don't realize that they're programming. I just wanted to touch on because I know that you explain this really well. Like one of the big things for survivors is we have a lot of, these programs from the Rosicrucians
Yeah.
in programming. So it can be that we were brought up to go into things like architecture or, for me, they were trying to push me into psychology, which thankfully I dropped out of, but you'll be put into fields like that. So hopefully they can control those areas more as well. And sacred geometry, and those figures and those shapes, maths is such a big part of the programming. Like I remember even, learning the times tables at the Jesuit primary school I was in, that was all tied into deeper programming levels as well. So I would just love because survivors have so much problems. So they
Yeah.
find it so hard and so challenging breaking through, why is sacred geometry not of God?
Yeah.
What would you say in response to that kind of question?
Well, I mean, let's just start with the Jesuits. So, from what I've just said, they are a polytheist organization. They're Gnostics within the church, as all of the um, monastic orders are, all based on the original Essenic order, which is a branch from the East, from Buddhism and stuff like that, in terms of that structure. Um, so, the Jesuits, they interpret the Bible through the seven sacred sciences that created mysticism before the flood. I call it Enochian mysticism, same religion that pops up at Babel. It's the religion of the giants, and it's the allegory for the coming mystical religion for the end time. And so they also, within their interpretive approach, because that's the polytheist approach, is not literal, but you have to be adept to understand the meanings of the allegories and the stories and stuff like that. Um, they also interpret things through an Egyptian lens in
Yeah.
terms of the polytheist side, right? So as we look at um, the control the of the things that they're involved in, they're going to take that approach in each of these seven sort of sciences, right? And so, as you mentioned, Rosicrucian is not only responsible for ensuring the old religion stays out there, but they're in charge of all of the literature, all of the writing, and they create their own writing guilds, old writing sort of cults, just as you would have it coming out of the history with the Greek mythology and legends. It's a similar type of writing as that. So mythopoetic would be as we might understand it through Tolkien and Lewis and the Inkling Society, which is one of these Rosicrucian writing societies. And just as the Knights of the Helmet and Knights of the Spear Shaker Society of Francis Bacon
Yeah.
was also one of those organizations. And of course, we look at all of the writings of Shakespeare and see, the product of that mythopoetic style of writing. So when we look at the seven sciences, it's not that knowledge is evil.
That's
It's
right.
how it's used. It can be used for good or it can be used for evil. So the knowledge of the seven sciences, and that's not like this is rocket science in terms of trying to figure this out, but it's grammar, it's rhetoric, it's dialectics, it's arithmetic, it's geometry, it's music, and it's astronomy. Masonry is the one that is used for the craft and Freemasonry, and they focus on sort of architecture. So you would look at, sort of the top three of the writing arts of grammar, rhetoric, and dialectics as being kind of what the Rosicrucians are involved on, right? And it's through those three sciences that philosophy comes from. It becomes the theology of the seven sciences. And philosophy means the love of wisdom in part, but the real meaning is the love of Sophia, which is the mother goddess of Gnosticism, who provides wisdom and the knowledge. And it's this knowledge that the fallen angels provide to the antediluvians and to the descendants of Cain, and Enoch, who forms the mystical sun worshiping and bull cult, that takes it to a whole new level, kind of like what we're seeing right now. This a whole new level of angelic technology that takes that whole period to a point of complete destruction. And I think the flood comes along to prevent the destruction by fire. What's interesting in the polytheist accounts out of the secret societies is that either Enoch or Lamech, depending on which account that you're looking at there, is going to put the location to this ancient knowledge under the Great Pyramid in 7 or 9 vaults with 36,525 books, and that these directions are written on two pillars. One will survive a flood, and one will survive destruction by fire. So they're not sure which one's coming.
Yeah.
And by inference, they realize that they have the technology provided by the angels to destroy the earth by fire, but that's, according to 2 Peter 3, reserved for the end time. So that's why the flood as the intercession. So this is the theology that has the ability to create the absolute knowledge, the absolute science, and why they have to keep it sort of secret. Now, what they do is in anything to do with mysticism, and understand, before I get into it, understand that when you hear pearls of wisdom, archives of the Masons, the Emerald Tablet, the Golden Fleece, the Tablets of Destiny, the Golden Apples, the Hall of Records, the Smargadina, the Hermetes Table of Ham, the Emerald Tablet, the Treasure at the End of the Rainbow, the thousands of different allegories for the same bank of knowledge is all this antediluvian angelic technology. That's the basis for polytheism because it's a knowledge cult. Gnosis means knowledge for the Gnostics, and it's the tree of Gnosis, as they like to call the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It's kind of a weird sort of way they manipulate that, but it's still what they use. So we need to understand that these sciences were created to lead people away from God.
Okay.
Number one number one purpose. Same with the religions. That's why you need to understand these seven sciences and that they are designed to degrade God and slander God because the fallen angels don't do that. They use their offspring and their followers to do that because they know the power of the God Most High. You don't do that. Um, they're there to with this knowledge and religion and education to not give God credit for anything. That's why any sort of creative account of the start of the universe is never permitted within science because you can't give them credit for anything. And so the fourth thing that they do with their knowledge is honor their pantheon of gods in everything they do within the religion and within those sciences, which is why we're inundated with all of their history, genealogies, belief system, and all of the entertainment, um, in all of the things that they build or educate people in, because they tend to use beast empire architecture that honors the gods. Um, University is a degree system. You wear a black Cathar robe when you graduate. You can't believe until you start to take a step back and start to connect the dots how many things that they um, brainwash us with through the education system to dumb us down and then reinforce that through the churches.
Yeah, all connected, isn't it?
It's always connected. And so when we look at modern campuses today, we also have secret societies on those campuses. So there's the lower level ones, like Alpha House and Beta House. But in the US, as a good example, in the Ivy League um, universities, they have one called the Skull of Bones,
Yeah,
which
I heard that.
branches into the Illuminati trunk order.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, Australia, like quite a few of our universities have Freemason lodges on them, like
Yeah.
Sydney, Melbourne, like so then Adelaide has them as well. So then they're not hiding it at all. And I'm sure
No,
that
they're not.
other
Yeah.
influences, do
And
you
the
know what I
Skull
mean?
of Bones is the Templar emblem.
Yeah.
I won't go into all of that. But so when we look at now the creation of original mysticism by the seven sciences that will merge with the angelic technology, they create this mystical religion to develop this knowledge. And so Enoch, son of Cain, puts it into the seven liberal sciences as we understand them today, the seven sacred sciences of old. And then they're going to only allow the noble elite of the first two classes, the larger family of the royals and the nobility, understanding Aryan means noble. they, they cover everything off in the words. Um, and that they're not going to educate the third and fourth class. So they're going to control the priest class. They're going to control the educated class. They're going to control the governing, all of the generals and leaders and all of the oligarch companies. And then in the third class, you're going to have a small entrepreneurial blacksmiths, tailors, bakers, small free enterprise. And the last class is going to be the slave and the working class, right? That's been
That's
throughout
us.
our history. It's still out
Yeah.
there today. And that's why they're trying to destroy the middle class. So only the nobility only the Aryans are being educated, and within the mystery schools that are developed to teach this knowledge into these seven disciplines. And that's where the secret societies take their beginnings as an extension to the mystery schools. And also understanding that the mystery schools imagery was a serpent in its glyphs and writings of ancientology.
Wow. So interesting. It's so important for us to just look at the root of where things come from, right? Like, and I know like
Yeah,
looking into the maths for me was difficult, because we're so brainwashed with it. But like when you start going back and seeing, like Pythagoras and his rituals, all of these
yeah.
being slaughtered, like, thousands at one time, it's like that wasn't to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Like that
No, it was
that
not.
was
These are no
not. He didn't get
But-
that formula from God, and then that, leads into so many other things. So yeah,
Well,
it's
and what they do is they get us on this white hat, dark hat thing,
yeah,
which is totally polytheist.
yeah.
So you have good magic, as in white magic, and black magic as a classic example, or an evil witch or a good witch, a good giant or an evil giant. In modern day language, it's white hat and black hat. And it's not that the white hats don't look after humans a little bit better, because they do, but they have the same agenda, the
Yeah.
same end goal as the dark hats do, and they still worship the same pantheon of gods. So when you hear people, and we want to be careful in terms of what they say and how they do things, when you see people like Elon Musk saying Google AI is the evil black AI, so therefore what I'm going to do is create good AI. We don't want AI,
Full
period.
stop. Take it back.
Yeah,
Oh
but
man.
that's how they get us. And they use that as those poles apart positions to cattle herd us in a direction, just as they use political parties, right and left, to do.
Two sides. So true. So true. And just because I'm looking at the time, I'm going to have to finish up. I could ask you questions all day. Gary's second book really dives into more of the prophecy, which I've really enjoyed reading your book just based on that as well, because like as a new believer, like have found it really difficult. And then everyone has their different opinions as well. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's good because Gary's has references. You can go and dig into the Bible yourself after you
Yeah,
read.
and what I also do in that book for people who are wanting to get into prophecy, in the preface, I lay out my approach and my disciplines. And so, agree or disagree, at least you know how I got
How
there.
to. Yeah.
But what I dislike about prophecy, not that I dislike prophecy, what I like about how it's used out there is that everybody says they base it biblically, and to a degree they do. Um, and so when I started to learn about other approaches, because all I did was I did the work myself, right? And but and it just dawned on me that if I'm going to figure all of these prophecies out throughout the Bible, I need to put everything around what Jesus said, not vice versa.
Amen to that.
And and then the other thing I realized is that, and when I've started to put it around that aha moment, I found that all the conflicts disappeared. So
Mhm.
you don't have to reinvent what something says, or you don't have to bend it like a pretzel or ignore it. Most
Yeah.
of the standard eschatological approaches do that when they come along with a verse or a passage that doesn't fit. They have
Leave
to make
that
it go
leave
away.
that one over,
Yeah,
over there.
yeah. And they hope people don't focus on it.
Read the Bible. Yeah.
Yeah. And you don't have to worry about that if your premise on how you approach it is right. Put everything around what Jesus said. Don't let people tell you that it's a topical order, that there's no order, it's just by topic, right? Well, a couple of things to that. He uses the word then in all three of the Gospels, and that's the Greek word tota. Means exactly that. And then this happens. There's no disorder to it. He's given you an order of events, and then he gives you the last 7 years in there with the divider of the abomination, and then instructs you to go read the book of Daniel to learn more about the first 3.5 years and the last 3.5 years that he's put the abomination there in for you. And a lot of people will also tell you that, well, you can't put Revelation around that chronological order that Jesus provides. I'm thinking when I come across that, that is the most weirdest thing I ever heard, other than that this was not in a chronological order, what Jesus said. And so I realize that people don't read enough and they just get the bullet points, and you're being manipulated when if you do that, because they're going to leave important things out. The book of Revelation, this is very important for people to understand, is the testimony of Jesus Christ, who gave that vision to an angel to show John in spirit. It cannot conflict with what he said in Matthew 24, Mark 13, or Luke 17 or 21. It cannot. Otherwise, why are we believing in this stuff, right? Why would we believe anything in the Bible? And so the Revelation is in a chronological order. I mean, you have the seven churches in the first five passages, but not all of those prophecies are fulfilled. Some of them are, some of them aren't. So it's what I talk about as a dual prophecy in book two. And so there's ones in each one. So like the hour of trial that we're going to be saved from, that doesn't happen in in the time of the seven churches, or the 10 days of tribulation. There's at least one in each of those that's reserved for the end time. But anyways, that's reserved for the six churches that John takes the letter back and delivers to, and it's a message for them. So the last 7 years begins in around Revelation 6. So now if you start at about Matthew 24, 6 to 7, use that as your template, but all the additional details of Luke 17, 21, and Mark 13 on top of that, you've got your basic template. You now fit all the other books, passages in the Bible in around that. And so start with Revelation 6 to about, again, 14, 6 or 7 as the first 3.5 years.
Wow. Yeah.
And then you're going to get a summary after that, after the preaching of the gospel, which is in the first 3.5 years of what Jesus talks about in Matthew 24. That's the end of the first 3.5 years at the time of the abomination. And just after the abomination, you get the destruction of Babylon. After the hour is provided again in Revelation 17 for the hour of destruction for Babylon. And this hour is when Babylon is destroyed. We get that in a summary account as the first event of the last 3.5 years after the 144,000 first fruits are shown in heaven. It's part of the resurrection sequence. And then we get the mark of the beast, and then we get everything in exact order, but it's a bullet point of the last 3.5 years. So now you can put that right around after the abomination in Matthew 24, and that takes you through 15 through 19. It's not, and once you have that laid down and you're putting
It's
Daniel on, all of a sudden you've got data points for all other prophecies in the Bible.
wow. You make it sound so, so simple. I love it.
It's supposed to be simple.
Exactly. I think that's the thing. Humans have made it so hard, sometimes deliberately. But
Well,
yeah,
I think it's the secret societies and
yes,
polytheist forces who know the Bible better than we do, for the
yes.
most part, who say, how do we get them so confused we can actually bring about the end time without a whole bunch of trouble?
Realizing, yeah. And in Gary's book, he goes through, I think, what something that's really important for survivors as well, because so many, if not all of us, have had some Jesuit programming, which seems to be kind of like an interface. It's like how they would use
Yeah.
you or access you, or the different brotherhoods and sisterhoods can get in and handle you. The Jesuits, of being the sneaky group, the infiltrators that they are, seem to have like some things planned for the end times as well. So would you be able to give us a bit of an overview there? Because I think that's important for survivors to know, like potentially what they might have or may even still be, you know, their bloodlines aligned with as well.
Yeah, so the Jesuits are going to play a very important role in the certainly to the first 3.5 year point of the last 7 years as they're involved. They're going to get pushed aside to a certain degree as well, but understand they're polytheists, so they're going to be at the core of this universal religion that's coming, but part of that. So, and they're going to go rogue again, which is why they were disbanded in the early 1800s because they got offside of the kings again. But understand Babylon is going to reign over the 10 kings, and you're going to have the universal religion come first. As part of the beast religion that was with us through all of our post-Diluvian history and would have been the Enochian mysticism before the flood. So it's the same religion that controls these 10 kings. And so the Jesuits who are trying to bring about the new Babylon are heavily involved with, and right from the beginning, with the Mary apparitions.
Mm.
So obviously they're a big proponent of Lourdes. They're a big proponent of Fatima, and a big proponent now, particularly with um, Pope Francis today, recognizing Medjugorje and asserting control over Medjugorje. But also understand there's Mary apparitions going around the world, as they are in polytheist religions, with a different Queen of Heaven. And she's called the Queen of Heaven in the Mary apparitions, but a Queen of Heaven is a mother goddess, whether it's an offspring god like Anat, or a parent goddess like Ashtaroth versus Anat, using the Canaanite pantheon. And so this is the a mother goddess. This is not a demonic um, vision. I think this is an angelic
Mm.
vision that is happening. It's at a whole different level of what demons seemingly have the
That's the
capability
trick,
of
isn't
doing.
it? Yeah.
Yeah. And so we're getting this that's going to work towards uniting the world through prophetic catastrophes.
Mm.
So with the six that were initiated at Medjugorje, for example, they were initiated as childhood, and they were given a certain date and a certain priest to work with that would come out on a day with the first prophecy of disaster, that if you don't convert to the true religion, the world's going to be destroyed. And there's only a certain amount of time to convert, or you won't be allowed to convert after that.
The fear programming.
Yeah.
Something.
And so what's interesting about all of this is that false prophets are what we are warned of, and it's the false prophets that's going to bring about Babylon. And so I think uh, the Jesuits are going to have an instrumental role in the coming about of these false prophets. But understand that Vaticanus Hill is a branch hill of Palatine Hill, of the seven hills of ancient Rome, right? And it was a Sibylline uh, cult that was in Palatine and the branch at Vaticanus Hill, both all Etruscan, Proto Latin. And so expect that in the end, the Christian religion of Roman Catholicism, as Protestantism, will be rolled into this larger religion. The Vatican probably still operates, um, but it's the center is going to be at Palatine Hill. And it's going to be the old religion as they bring back all of the monotheism back into polytheism, as they believe monotheism went rogue. So they're going to play a pivotal role in all of this. And I think we need the false prophets to come first, Babylon to come first, and then you get the 10 kings.
Wow. Geez, we have some interesting times to come, Gary.
We do. We
Well,
do.
thank
And
you so much for today. It's been incredible. Just hearing the depth, of your work, and I think still feel like we've only just scratched the surface. Would you be
yes.
able to let everyone know like where they can find you and your books?
Yes. So the best way to get a hold of me is through my website. Whether you want to contact me or to get a hold of my book. So that's the Genesis 6, Gen, I'll get it out yet. The Genesis 6 conspiracy.com, the number 6 conspiracy.com. And on the website, there's a contact the author. There's also a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters of book one, all 84 chapters of book two. And if you wanted to get a signed copy, I do ship overseas. I ship all around the world, US, Canada. So I have three buy pages on there. When you go to the buy now, buy page one is for book one, and there's discounts for multiple books. And for page two is for book two. And then page three is you want to bundle the two. And you get a discount for starting at two. So if you wanted to buy one of each and get a signed copy, that's how you do it. You can also link over to barnesandnoble.com, amazon.com, amazon.ca. I have to get .au up and .uk up just to automatically link over there. Apparently, I found out a way to do that. I just have to pay so much every month, but we'll
Of
we'll
course.
probably get that done up. But you can also link over to the Kindle version and also to the Audible version for both books, as Audible is out for both books. We got those out in the last half of last year. So whichever format that you want to order it in, you can order it through Amazon to get a book for me, or you can get the Kindle and the Audible versions through Amazon as well.
Awesome. And I have to ask, is there a book three that is starting to form by any chance?
Yeah, actually, yeah, I've gotten about 10 chapters into it, but I've
Really?
been
I had
so
a
busy in
feeling
the
at
last
the end of
year.
the second one, I was like, I reckon he's going to do a number three for sure.
I am, and it's going to get more into prophecy, but it's going to come out of prehistory,
Awesome.
but it'll lean a little bit more to prophecy. So it's going to be about the covenants and how they build through the Noahic covenant into the Abraham covenant, and into the Holy Covenant, and really get on the table the idea of Israel and Judah, how they violated the covenant, but they're going to be reconciled in the end time. So I'm going to get into that parallel set of prophecies, and show you how that works with end time church prophecy, but
Wow.
on a parallel track.
That's great.
So
That sounds really
yeah,
important too, because I know like there's so much confusion at the moment with things like Noahide laws and understanding,
yeah,
God's promises as opposed to what the church and the
yeah.
Vatican promised us. So yeah, how
Well,
needed.
and they want to get us back to the Noahide laws. I mean, it's really kind of similar to the 10, depending on which version that you're writing of the 10 Commandments. But what they do when they do that is they set up their end game in
It's
part of the
sneaky.
tactics.
Yeah.
It is, yeah, because they
It's
say
close, but not. Yeah.
monotheism went rogue. So they like to do a lot of stuff at the point of Moses because he's important to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And if they show that it's a rogue variety of the original polytheist religion, and they'll get there with Moses and then backtracking to those laws with the laws of Moses, who would be following the Noahide
Wow.
laws, even though, right? Just that's how they'll get at part of what they're going to do.
Wow. That makes so much sense. All right. Just the planning of, what we're seeing unfold at the moment. It's just incredible. It's like
It is. It
just
is.
the,
It's
the effort
unbelievable.
they've been to. And I mean, to me, it just shows it's not human. Do you know what I mean? It's these invisible ones feeding down the
Yeah.
order. I just don't think any human mind could have put
No.
this kind of thing together. Yeah.
And hold it together as such a
Mm.
transgenerational effort.
Totally, totally.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again for your time today, Gary. I hope today connects, lots of dots for survivors and for everyone listening. And yeah, we just thank you for your work, Gary. Like, I think you're, bringing the truth and God's truth at the same time is just so refreshing. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
God bless you.
Well, thank you for having me on your show and getting some of my information out there because I think it's helpful for a lot of people and use what makes sense for you and dig deeper. That's
I
kind
will
of what it's all about is go further.
dig deeper. I love it. Thank you, Gary. God bless.